Thank you so much for your time today, and we are talking sustainability strategies. We're bringing together sustainability leaders to provide information on how to develop an effective sustainability strategy within your business. That's what we're attempting to do today. So I'll put the first question out to all of you, and frankly I'd like all of you to run with this as you see fit. In your experience, what are the top sustainability considerations that a modern business needs to manage? And Adam,
And I think I heard Bill start with me, so sorry that correct up just a little bit. But one of the challenges is getting lost in translation. And I think the key is to really simplify what is sustainability and what is sustainability from a business perspective. And we boil it down into something pretty simple. Most business people know how to identify risk, take limited resources, and generate return. What we're talking about in the sustainability space is really having a broader horizon and a much longer timetable that we're looking at. So with that perspective, you use the same kind of concepts, the same kind of tools, the same kind of discipline that you may have in business and in traditional business, but you're looking at it from a broader stakeholder perspective, perhaps a broader opportunity perspective as well for your company, and not just from maybe an immediate quarter or a fiscal year, but you're looking out generations, and that really changes the dialogue, but it also simplifies the dialogue. And I think that's really one of the important places to start.
I'll go to you next, Ally.
Yeah, so what Adam said was great. There is sustainability as an operational improvement driver as well. Okay, and so a lot of what we think about is environmental sustainability. That I think it's where the term originally came from. But the way we look at it as people need to be operating sustainably for themselves so that they don't burn out, all of the usual things. But then they also, if they are working in a more sustainable way, you can drive your company's prosperity. All right, and so profits can go up. And you run a more streamlined organization that allows you to operate in a really governed way. And so that's what we call principles. And that's a big part of our strategy as well. And then finally, if we get those two things right, you get to the planet and operating in an environmentally sustainable way. And so at the end of the day, it's really about using efficiency in a way that you can really maximize the prosperity and minimize the impacts the company has on the world that are negative. Carmel.
Thanks, Allyson. And I guess really my point would be just to build on what Adam and Allyson have said about in terms of approaches. I think if we're looking at the particular issues that companies that I deal with are talking about as their sort of priorities, then clearly it's around climate change. Things like net zero commitments, scope 3 reporting and emissions. Big thing for the toy industry, which is an area that I come from, is around the whole circular economy and particularly tackling plastics. Equity and inclusion, I think these are all kind of big issues, particularly related to environment that companies are dealing with. Plus, I would say that the big challenge that is coming forward for companies is around transparency and traceability. That's massive. Every conversation I have with companies that work within our program is about transparency and traceability and credibility and assurance that can be trusted, all those kind of areas. There's a lot of focus on the environment from a sustainability perspective, and I always say this, we mustn't lose sight of our commitments around social as well. So they must almost be maintained. So I think for companies, when they're thinking about their sustainability issues, it's sort of around balancing the kind of urgency around climate change and environment, plus the forever should be maintained commitment to people.
Carmel, just picking up what you said there were some interconnected things that you spoke about there, about the transparency and the social aspects that people might not automatically jump to. Is it very important to remember for you that bigger picture and not just the initial things you would need to report on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think so. Traceability and transparency are growing expectations, either from regulators who will be expecting companies to be able to report transparency, to know where products are coming from, to have that whole kind of end-to-end traceability. But I think dealing with sustainability issues is never easy. And companies are often fearful about being transparent about some of the challenges. But I think that's when really your stakeholders are engaged with you, when you are transparent and you're being very authentic. Because if it was easy, we wouldn't need conversations like this. So I think transparency is critical, yes.
Very true.
Yeah. Can I add on to that? The transparency part, particularly like Carmel, you come from the sell directly to consumer side, right? And our company, Bigger Hughes, we sell to other companies, so business to business kind of sales, and to government, I should say. So with that, transparency is little different, right? And so the transparency that we look to provide is around how we make the product and its performance. So one area I would say that became really critical, any company that has a net zero commitment has really got to show clear transparency in how they account and then show real reduction. And I see that Adam's nodding too, so I suspect that they're dealing with the same thing. And so it's just worth noting that transparency is really important, regardless of who you sell to, though it may look a little different, right? And so we try to be very transparent in owning the things that we need to work on so that people understand that we know we could do better and that we have clear strategy in place to do that.
Yeah, if I may add, we sell batteries to the world's automakers, and they're some of the preeminent brands who have very important customer relationships, consumer relationships, and transparency up and down the value chain for automakers is tremendously important. And it's been summed up in, I think, the most simple terms is make it real and keep it real, and be honest and transparent. And you could sometimes get overly focused on the regulatory requirements as must-dos versus what can this do for my business. And there's really tremendous opportunity to deepen your relationship with your customers and perhaps their customers, but also just building a better, stronger company, as Allyson has mentioned.
Now, one thing I'm really keen to do today through all of our sessions is give people tangible advice they can take away. And transparency seems to be something we've got quite deeply into here. But if I could just get 30 seconds from each of you in terms of advice for people, when it comes to achieving that transparency, whether that's internally or with other organisations you work to, what advice would you give for people about how to achieve a useful level of transparency? If I could just get 30 seconds from each of you. Adam, if I could start with you.
Well, I would start with having a group of advisors that you can have frank conversations with, that you can really explore what does transparency mean to you. You're able to get that stakeholder feedback. Materiality assessments are tools we use in the discipline. But it's very important to have that group of, let's just call them trusted advisors, that you can turn to and say, we're thinking about doing this. Is it the right thing to do? Is it enough? Are there other things we should be considering? But without that group, I would feel like we would be flying blind. So certainly something I would suggest.
Okay, Ali, I'll come to you if I can get 30 seconds on that, please.
Yeah, just really quick. I would say the trusted advisors for us is a clear board structure that allows our board to weigh in and really drive that transparency, right? They really challenge us to own the good and the bad and the ugly. The next point to add on to what Adam said is that ensure that you are very consistent in how you report so that it becomes people know what to expect and they can look to see trends. That's really important. And then the third point I'd say for us that we really drive home is really strong internal controls and governance on what we report, how we report. It's all documented, and we use independent assurance providers on all of our data. And so those are some 3 quick things that people can do.
And Carmel, if you could just give me 30 seconds and then we'll move on to other subjects.
Sure. And I guess it's probably good to know that I'm building on what Allyson and Adam have said themselves. I think, and just a point of clarity, we are a business to business, not business to consumer. So actually, what we're quite involved in is ensuring that transparency. So building on and agreeing with Adam and Allyson, I think importantly, the first starting point is that you must understand your impacts, your responsibilities, and the expectations of your stakeholders, so that you know what you want to be, what you must be transparent on. That's critical. You don't need to be transparent on everything. And actually, if you're transparent on things that aren't of relevance or interest, it's kind of seeing, well, why? So you need to know what you need to be transparent about, where the interest is. And fundamentally, from a transparency perspective and a business to business environment, you must know who's in your supply chain. It still astounds me, but it's not surprising, because supply chains are very complex, global, fast moving, etc. But lots of people don't know who will be on their first tier suppliers. And if you want to talk about transparency, you need to know who you're doing business with.
Okay, well, moving on to our next subject now. Ali, as someone representing the energy industry, what are some of the most important sustainability practices you've been able to implement?
Yeah, so I got a poster behind me that I'll point to. It's our all-in carbon out program. And so that's an actual employee-driven program across the company to look for opportunities to take, carbon equivalent emissions out of Baker Hughes operations. And so we started first with our scope 1 and 2, our operational emissions, and are expanding that into, to Carmel's point about knowing suppliers and our supply chain. We're going up and we're going downstream into our value chain. So that's in that area, that's our single biggest engagement program. The other things are we've got community practices across the company set up so that we have strong community groups for employees under the social part of what we do. And then the last part I'm trying to give you an ES and a G is that we really wanted to focus that we're in the energy sector doing the right thing at the right time always. There is sometimes a question in the energy sector. We get negative press on being an oil and gas company or selling to oil and gas companies in a carbon constrained world. But we operate in a very principled manner as a part of the energy sector. There's always scrutiny, and it's the principles part of sustainability is critical, as well as obviously safety is still a very huge part of what the energy sector drives home for sustainable practices.
Okay, well, moving on to, because we are talking a lot about strategy here, and the gap between the boardroom and the plant floor, the factory floor, whichever industry you work in. Adam, I'll come to you on this. How do you effectively integrate the two, converting what's been talked about around the board table with the best intentions, with actually delivering that on a day-to-day basis?
Consistency and continuity from the very top of the organization to the shop floor is absolutely critical. Allyson talked about the importance of governance at the board level, making sure your directors are fully engaged and part of the process, and being very transparent with them as to what's happening on the plant floor all the way up to their vantage point. But conversely, making sure you understand what is really happening on the shop floor, what's really happening within your supply chain, not just your tier 1 suppliers, but even further beyond. But then also just expanding the universe to really look beyond what may be traditional stakeholders to an extended stakeholder universe. And it's all based on defining what is most important for your company and your stakeholders. Coming back to that materiality assessment, it really starts and ends with that, to be able to provide that common thread about what's important right from the boardroom to the shop floor.
I'll open that to you as well, Ali and Carmel. How do you see the best way to actually translate the talk, which is all best intentioned, with the actual reality of a company running?
I think so. For me, again, I think it has to be relevant. So to your employees, to your stakeholders, there has to be a reason why this focus or this target or this ambition is important to you as an organization. I think it needs to be ambitious. Certainly people entering the workforce now want to work for companies who are about driving change, not maintaining the status quo. So I think they want to be part of something that's ambitious. And it's really important that the business has the capability to deliver on the ambition that they set. So that involves, and that comes from the board, sponsorship and commitment, but it comes from ensuring that people actually in the organization are able to deliver on the commitment because they have the resources, whether that's capacity, capability, budget, whatever it may be. And I think then just communicate, really.
Allyson.
Yeah, so I'll take a slightly different perspective here. Within the energy sector right now, we've got there's a big push, right, around climate, as well as making sure that energy can be supplied everywhere in the world and it needs to be at an affordable price. We call it the energy trilemma. A lot of that is geopolitically driven today. And so that puts us in a lot of tension as a sector, okay, because people feel entitled to energy. And so a big part, where am I going with this with strategy? Well, so companies that were classic traditional energy sources like oil and gas, coal, et cetera, they're at a point that they're thinking we've got to diversify and strategically go in a slightly different direction while we maintain critical supplies of energy. But part of that trilemma is being sustainable while we do that, so we can lower emissions and get to a net zero global economy. And so that connection between something that isn't even a company-driven strategy, but more of the world calls for action, okay? We've got to think about how do you maintain a prosperous business for the company and for shareholders while also delivering on a great societal challenge. And so that rubber meets the road for not just our company, but all of the sector at the stated ambitions that we put out, which is why we take a really full-bodied approach. We're going to publish our sustainability strategy here in about a month. And we basically then immediately show the action plan behind that so that people can see that we're not just talking about it, but we're actually doing that. And that helps to build trust, okay? Because trust right now is thin across society and particularly within the energy area.
Okay, I'll go for a question from our viewers today. They've been coming in thick and fast, so I will get to a couple of these now. One theme that's been coming up, a question here about smaller businesses, because for larger multinationals, you can have a huge overreaching policy that goes out to everyone. What advice would all of you have for maybe some of the more smaller or medium businesses about putting in strategies when it comes to sustainability?
I can maybe kick off. I spend a lot of my time working with SMEs and some very, very small companies. And a lot of them are actually, relatively new businesses who started up with social kind of impacts at their founding principles of what they do. So they are very driven and very focused, and they can have as much impact in a different way. So I think what we often see is that smaller companies will come together and collaborate through maybe bigger initiatives. And even if you look at huge companies that I'm sharing the panel with, they will have supply chains. There will be ways that companies can come together over some common goals. So my advice or my suggestion would be to find ways, if you're smaller, to collaborate. You can bring fantastic insight, energy, new ideas, new thinking to perhaps more established organizations. And by working together, you can actually create an impact that's far bigger than your organizational footprint on its own.
Yeah, well said. I mean, we have a bunch of small suppliers that we engage with. And I would say I came from running a smaller nonprofit. And the power of passion that comes in with that is really fantastic. And then the other part is the sort of purpose-driven nature of a lot of smaller companies. I'm not saying that our three groups aren't, because they are all very purpose-driven, but that it's easier to unify, and a lot of times, particularly for those companies that are in startup mode, more innovative, right? And we look to you to give us some really great ideas and be lean and mean, but we can help amplify what it is you're trying to accomplish.
I think what Allyson said is spot on. Sorry to cut in there, but it is about that there can be like an innovation hub through smaller businesses, but you need to work with the bigger companies to scale that. So it can be a fantastic collaboration.
Yeah, and you're much closer to your stakeholders. In a large company, you can be sometimes very removed. A smaller company, you may be closer to your customer. You may be closer to your communities. You may be closer to the downstream businesses that may impact from your product or solution. And I think another thing that's really important to mention is that we're all on a journey, and we all have to start somewhere, and we're all starting at different places, and we're all headed towards a future that is more sustainable, that utilizes resources more effectively, that is more fair, just, and equitable. But that's not going to happen overnight, be it in a large company, a small company, a nonprofit, or you look at society as a whole. So being part of that journey, being cognizant that things will not change immediately overnight, but find those areas, coming back to what's important, what's truly material for your business and your stakeholders, and trying to figure out how you can move forward. It's really the same if you're a small company, a big company, or a government, or any other organization. It comes back to doing the basics.
And I'm going to do the thing that every host shouldn't do, and that's ask an enormous question just before we're up to time. So I'll regret this very shortly, I'm sure. How on earth, if you are sitting there as a chief sustainability officer or similar, and there's all of these things that you want to accomplish, how do you go about prioritizing which ones to do and in which order? What advice would you give to people on that? And I open that up to all of you.
Well, I guess I'll start. One of the challenges is knowing when and how to deal with the folks that are truly passionate about something, are truly focused on positive change, but it may not be completely aligned with what is material to your company or your stakeholders. Being able to deal with that conflict, that tension. There are so many causes and initiatives and opportunities that I wish I could support or my company could support. But being able to come back to a list of really defined priorities that have been vetted externally with our stakeholders, that have been really identified as what's important to our business and how we can actually drive positive change, and focusing on those, but being aware and being cognizant of the fact that there will be others focused on their journeys that will want to be with you, will want to join with you. You may want to join with them. But it is a process of really identifying priorities, where you can make the most impact, and really being true to that as you proceed, and making course corrections along the way. But knowing that is a very real, for me and my organization, a daily challenge to make sure we're keeping up with what's important to us and our stakeholders, but also listening to the rest of the world.
Allyson, I'll come to you next.
I actually forgot the question, but I think I remember now. It was that because I was really listening to Adam.
It was about prioritization. How do you pick from the list about which is the real priority when it comes to your sustainability strategy or goals?
And it's like one of these things where you get so into the content that you lose sight. So, there's a bunch of priorities, and Adam earlier mentioned, like the role of stakeholders in determining what's material or not. And if you pulse often enough, that can be almost a little transient, right? If you're not careful, you might chase a trend, right? So one of the things that we always do to stay focused is set a course on a strategy and let it run for a few years, right? And again, Adam said it in the beginning, it's managing for a longer time horizon, right? And that's how we're able to balance that, because we're looking at longer commitments, longer delivery times than a fast quarter close that a lot of big companies have, right? And so we balance the challenge by assessing everything as it comes in, okay? But then deciding like, oh, is there an existing program that we could leverage to do that in the heat of the moment? Or is this not really as material, but it's just a press release that came out or some other thing. And so that coupled with very strong enterprise risk management, it's worth noting because it's hardly talked about in sustainability circles in a lot of ways, is that you've got to have your sustainability priorities nested in to address and minimize corporate risk. If those two are not holding hands, the success of one or both will be crippled. Because there's great opportunity in getting them to hold hands. Lower risk is great for everybody.
And Carmel, I will give you the pleasure of the final word on this. How do you go about picking from that list of priorities?
So I'm going to be a little controversial, maybe.
Oh, feel free.
I don't think you should be picking and choosing A over B. And the reason I say that is that I think if you've done the work that we've all talked about in setting your priorities, these should be business imperatives. So you're now seeing, at the C-suite, chief sustainability officers, just like you have CFOs and CEOs and CPOs and all the other C's that you can have. Sustainability, for me, and I appreciate that this can sound quite simplistic or maybe naive, but I don't think it is, or it shouldn't be, a side strategy. For the companies that are really successful at this, it's in their DNA and it's not a choice. It's not like you would you wouldn't decide things to drop some other kind of key elements of your business activities. So I think, and it is in line with what Allyson and Adam have both said, it's about being focused, having the right strategies and sticking to them. You do need to be able to course correct and be agile in those, but it shouldn't be so easy for you to go, okay, we're just not going to bother with the social element of sustainability anymore. We're going to focus on the environment. So I don't think you have a choice. I think you have to do the work to get your priorities right, and then you have to stick to them.
Okay, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground. We've talked about making sure that you can see across your whole supply chain, about transparency. We've talked about priorities. We've talked about collaboration. Huge number of things we could talk about. We could carry on for some time, but that would interrupt the networking break, which as a host I know is always a bad idea because people like coming to these things to network as well. I thank you all so much for your time. Be incredibly generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining us at Sustainability Live, New York.